Hello wonderful people, it is Genevieve, and in this video we're going to learn how to paint moss. And this video is part of a digital art course that is designed as a month-long YouTube series, so it is totally free. And you can definitely choose to only watch this one video if all you care about is how to paint moss. Or you can take on the challenge of improving our art skills by drawing along with the community every day. And if you want to do that, make sure to check out my website where the full schedule for the entire challenge is going to be. And also make sure to subscribe as well as ring the bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming textures that are going to be part of this course. All you need for this tutorial is some sort of a digital art software, and I will be using Procreate on the iPad Pro. But you can definitely use pretty much anything that has layers in it. So Photoshop, Corel Painter, Krita, Affinity Designer. Honestly, most mainstream, and not even like that mainstream, digital art software will do for this tutorial. I will be suggesting just really basic digital art brushes, so basically the one that come with your software, they're definitely gonna work. And I will also include a free color palette in the description below, but otherwise you can pick your own colors if that's more what you're into. And if you are watching this video in the course, you also need to set aside, I would say, 10 to 20 minutes, depending on whether you are on day 15 or 16 of the program. And with that being said, let's start drawing. So start by creating canvas, and the size doesn't really matter that much. I recommend at least 2000 by 2000 if you're just practicing, so you know you get something big enough. And I also recommend that you start by setting your background to a neutral color. So if you have the color palette, any of the colors on the right, so the grays, they're neutral grays, so you can pick whichever one you prefer. You're then going to create a new layer, just one. I don't know why I created two right there. And on this layer, you're going to draw some sort of a base that's going to support your moss. So if you've been following the program, you can definitely use the rock, so the rock sphere that we've created earlier last week. Otherwise, go ahead and just draw a circle that is some sort of a gray or brownish color. And I mean, you can draw pretty much any shape that you want. Honestly, I said a circle because we've been drawing spheres in this program, but really, you just need something for your moss to be on. Once that is done, we're going to create 3 layers on which we're actually going to draw the bulk of the moss. So the first layer is going to be the back. The second layer is going to be renamed to mid. And the third layer is going to be front or top, I don't remember. Front. And we're going to go back to the back layer and select a fairly dark green that is a little bit blue. So not just like an apple green, more of a bluish green. And you can pick pretty much any brush that has a lot of texture in it, or some texture in it, I should say. I'm using the dry ink brush that comes with Procreate. It's in the inking panel, but there are so many different brushes that you can use. And all you want at this stage is kind of map out where your moss is going to be. And the thing with moss is, since it's a living thing, it is fairly irregular. So just go ahead and scribble very super loosely and roughly and quickly. And you actually want to leave some space empty, and you want some space where you can see the actual stroke of the pencil. You want to be super quick and rough at this stage. Because we're gonna layer more colors on top of this, and by being that rough and quick, this is how we're gonna get most of our texture, and that's how we're gonna get the moss to look realistic in the end. So don't be afraid to be super quick here. Once you do have your base, go ahead and select a lighter green that is also a bit more yellow. And we're going to start layering. So go on your mid layer, and with the same brush that you've been using, you're going to, again, squiggle, scribble, and just add more texture on top of what you already have. And this is a good time to start thinking about light and shadows. So moss, the way it works is, even if you look at it from afar, it looks like a fairly smooth surface. But if you look at it closely, depending on the type of moss, obviously, but it tends to clump. So on this layer, basically you would draw kind of a top of the clump, if that makes any sense. So thinking of your light source, in my case, my light, I'm imagining it to be on the top left. So the lightest part of my moss clumps would be kind of top left areas of the clumps. That was a weird sentence that I just said, but I said it, so I'm just gonna roll with it. But basically, as you can see here, I'm not covering the entire darker section with this new lighter color. I'm just covering some areas of it, and the areas tend to be more on the top, and I'm leaving some exposed dark green, kind of the bottom right. So what you should be doing at this step is, yeah, you're just creating your clumps, and you're leaving some space to see kind of the base. So if you have the rock, it would be the rock. In this case, it's just like a brown, but you're leaving some holes, but you're also leaving some holes kind of from one layer to the other. So we're seeing some of dark green shine through because we have texture in the brush, but also because we're intentionally leaving some dark green sections exposed. So at this stage, it looks a bit crazy. I'm aware of it, but trust me, we're gonna make it look better in just a second. So go ahead and select your smudge tool, which is usually kind of a finger icon in most digital art software, and you can set the smudge tool to pretty much whatever brush you want. I use the stucco brush in the painting section from Procreate, but that's just what I use pretty much every time I use this smudge tool. And what you're going to do with it is you're going to kind of blend this lighter green and the darker green together. It's actually not going to blend them together because they're on separate layers, but basically you're just going to smoothen the bottom edge of your light green, which is going to give the illusion that it is blending in the darker green. So you want to make sure that the top edge, or the edge that is on the top, I don't know why I clarified that. You want to make sure that this top edge stays fairly sharp and crisp, but you do want to smooth the bottom one so that it looks a bit less scribbly and start to get a feel for something a bit more natural and organic. Cool. So now that we have this, we're ready to move on to probably the most exciting step, or maybe I think the most exciting step is actually the very last one, but this one is pretty cool as well. And we're just going to add some very textured green on top of everything. So go ahead and select your front layer or top layer, depending on however you named it, as well as a super light green. And you're going to use just a regular charcoal brush. So most digital art software, like the basic brush set they come with, include charcoal. I'm using the 6B compressed, I think it was called, from Procreate. And you're very lightly, and with a tilt in your pencil, if you have a software and a pencil that support tilt, you're just going to add some really cool, very light, very soft texture on the very top part of your clumps. And you can see here I'm drawing again very loosely. This is a project where we're drawing loosely. We're not here to draw very super detailed stuff. Again, because we're drawing something organic. It's not going to be sharp edges and turns and angles. That's not the thing here. So very loosely, just sprinkle some light and some texture, and you're going to see this is going to make the moss feel alive. It's going to make it feel like there's some sun shining on it, and it's going to make it feel like it has a lot of texture to it. So use your judgment and feel free to try stuff. You can definitely erase. Since we're keeping everything on separate layers, it's always easy to erase and just start over this last step if you didn't like it. So don't overthink everything, just try, zoom in, zoom out, and once you're happy with it, we're gonna move to the next step. And right now we have a really nice moss texture, but it looks a little bit artificial. So the next part in the video is all about making it feel more natural. So we're gonna create a few layers here. Go ahead and create a layer that you're gonna rename to extra. Another layer that you're gonna rename to colors, and this one, the blending mode, is going to be set to colors, and you're going to lower the opacity somewhere around 30%. You're then going to create another layer. This one is going to be renamed to shadows, and you're going to set the blending mode to linear burn and lower the opacity around 30%. You're then going to create another layer. This one is going to be renamed to highlights, and the blending mode of this one is going to be set to soft light. And finally, go ahead and create one last layer, and this one you're going to rename it to grass. Then go back to your extra layer and go back to, or actually use the same charcoal brush that you've been using. And you're going to select a darker green that is fairly similar to the dark green that you used at first, but is a little bit more yellow. You could honestly use the same green that you used on your like back base layer, but it doesn't matter, just use dark green, that's all I'm saying. And on this extra layer, we're just going to add a little bit more dimension. So what I like to do is very quickly and roughly, that's kind of the keywords of this video, going over the edges to blend them in a little bit better with the base. So you don't want to fully blend them, like we're not going to use the smudge tool to create some sort of a gradient because moss is not a gradient. But I kind of like to soften it a little bit, so soften the edges a little bit, and that's what I do on this edge layer with a fairly dark green. And I also go in and fill in a little bit some of the old holes. Not all of them. You do want to see some of your base, so the rock in this case, through some of the clumps, but not all of them. And I also like adding extra sections of darkness. So really this extra layer is basically just a layer on which you can experiment, adding a little bit more dimension and a little bit more texture. Since we're still using a charcoal brush that has a lot of texture to it, that's a really nice way of adding more dimension and feeling to your piece. And you can definitely change your color as well. On this extra layer, I also use like a super bright green and very lightly go over and add just like random little spots of lights, because again, we're drawing moss and not every little piece of moss, I don't know what they're called, like the individual little like strands of moss, they're not all the exact same green. So this extra layer is really where you're gonna make this piece feel alive and organic and a bit random in a way. We're also going to use this colors layer to amplify the like organic feel. And to do that, just select some sort of a like orange or brown or like burnt orange type of color, and with your same charcoal brush, loosely color over some parts of the moss. You can also use the smudge tool to blend in the edges a little bit. So you can see here, if I hide the layer, it just is a subtle difference, but it's so easy to make, and I really think in the end that's kind of what makes a piece feel more professional. That being said, once you're done with that, go ahead and select your shadows layers, as well as a like grayish type of purple, as well as a more regular brush. So I'm using the dry ink brush, but you could use pretty much any like soft round brush, whatever you usually use as your regular drawing brush. And this is where you would draw your environmental shadows. So if you have, for example, like a rock that is casting a shadow on your moss, or like a tree or whatever, that's on this layer that you would draw it. Since we're just drawing a random surface of moss in like the abyss of gray canvas, I'm just kind of showing you what type of effect that would get, but really this layer is more for like pieces that you would draw in context. The highlight layer is pretty much the same thing. So it's more for pieces in context. That's where the sun would shine through. So you would use, again, the same brush, but on the highlight layer and with a like banana yellow type of color. And that's, yeah, where the sun would hit. You would just add a little bit of highlights there. Then we're going to move on to my absolute favorite layer in this, which is the grass. And you're probably thinking, why are we drawing that grass in this moss tutorial? But it's because it makes a big difference and it looks really cool. So with a very light green and a small version of your regular brush, you're just going to add some tiny little blades of grass that poke out of your moss. And it's not really grass, honestly. If you've ever looked at moss, you're probably going to see some random little pieces that are super thin and kind of poke out. So you just sprinkle them all over in groups of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's going to make your moss feel so good and so natural. It's going to make it look soft and fluffy and realistic and natural and organic and all those things you want your moss to be. So there you go. This was how to draw moss in pretty much any digital art software. If you are following the program, make sure to come back to this video tomorrow for day 16. So on day 15, you draw moss on a sphere, and on day 16, you were drawing on like probably a more normal rock shape or like a log or whatever, so in context basically. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up because it really does help the channel. And before you leave, don't forget to subscribe because I put out new videos like this one every week, especially during the month of January, where we're going to cover a total of 13 different textures spread across 5 teams. So make sure not to miss that, and I will see you soon.